A story that could happen to any young woman who dared to defy ancestral traditions in the name of her own heart. This is the story of Amira Hussain, only 22 years old, brutally murdered in broad daylight in Karachi, Pakistan, on May 15, 2014. A young woman who paid with her own life for choosing to love someone her family did not approve of. Amira Hussain was born in 1992 in a small village on the outskirts of Karachi, the youngest daughter of a traditionalist family that had followed ancestral codes for generations. At 22, she carried not only a 3-month pregnancy growing in her womb, but also a deadly secret that would destroy everything around her. Her name, which means princess in Arabic, contrasted cruelly with the dark fate that awaited her in the busy streets of Pakistan's second-largest city. Unlike her older sisters, Amira had always shown a dangerous curiosity about the world beyond the walls of her home. While other young women her age passively accepted marriages arranged by their families, she asked questions that disturbed the elders. Why couldn't women choose their own husbands? Why was romantic love considered a threat to family order? These apparently innocent questions would plant the seeds of her own destruction. Amira's beauty was known throughout the region. Hair black as night, expressive eyes that seemed to question every tradition, and a smile that hid the growing rebellion in her heart. But there was something more dangerous growing within her, the courage to defy a millennial system that controlled every aspect of women's lives in her community. The Hussain family lived according to ancestral codes, where the patriarch's word was absolute, unquestionable, and final law. Hassan Hussain, her father, was a 52-year-old man known in the community as a respected merchant and inflexible guardian of traditional values. His hands, calloused from hard work, also carried the weight of keeping family honor intact, a responsibility he took more seriously than life itself. Amira's mother, Fatima, was the perfect example of the submissive woman that society expected. Married at 14 through family arrangement, she had never questioned a single masculine decision in her 38 years of life. She lived confined to the domestic universe, communicating with her husband through respectful whispers and lowered eyes. Her older daughters had followed the same path without resistance, accepting husbands chosen by their parents and silently disappearing into the routine of obedient wives. But Amira's brothers, Ahmed and Rashid, represented the most violent face of patriarchy. Young men of 24 and 26, respectively, they had deeply internalized the belief that controlling their sisters was not only a right, but a sacred duty. Any feminine disobedience was seen as a direct affront to their masculinity, a stain on their reputation that needed to be cleansed with blood if necessary. Amira's engagement to her cousin Malik had been arranged when she turned 16, following the family tradition of keeping marriages within the clan. Malik, 3 years older, had been waiting patiently for 6 years to consummate the union, trusting that his future wife would remain pure and obedient until marriage. For 8 months that would forever change the course of 2 lives, Amira and Omar al-Rashid met secretly in the most unlikely places in Karachi. Busy markets where they could get lost in the crowd, distant parks where no one knew them, and even mosques where simultaneous presence could be justified as coincidence. Each meeting was a dangerous dance between desire and death, a bet that only one of them would survive to tell. Omar, 15 years older than Amira, possessed a seductive eloquence that contrasted with the rudeness of the men from her village. He spoke about freedom, about a world where women could dream beyond the limits imposed by families. He promised a different life from the one predestined with her cousin Malik, an existence where her thoughts would matter, where her voice would be heard, where love would be the foundation of the relationship and not just an expected consequence. Omar's promises were like honey to a young woman suffocated by traditions. He convinced her that together they could defy the system, that true love was stronger than any ancestral code. He spoke about cities where women worked freely, chose their own destinies, lived as complete human beings and not as masculine property. For a young woman who had always questioned the limitations imposed on her gender, these words were irresistible. What Amira didn't know was that these same seductive promises had been made before word for word to another woman who had also believed she was living a great love. Omar's tactics were refined by experience, perfected through sinister practice that he kept carefully hidden from all his victims. The truth about Omar al-Rashid was more terrible than any nightmare Amira could imagine. 5 years before meeting her, he had been married to Zara, a 19-year-old who had also been seduced by the same promises of freedom and true love. Zara had defied her family to marry Omar believing she had found the man who would free her from the chains of oppressive traditionalism. But after 6 months of marriage, when Zara began to question some of Omar's controlling attitudes and expressed desire to maintain contact with her original family, she discovered the real face of the man she had chosen. On a December night in 2009, during an argument that quickly escalated to physical violence, Omar strangled his first wife with his own hands, eliminating the woman who had begun to become inconvenient for his plans. Zara's murder was carefully covered up. Omar claimed natural death, corrupted witnesses, and manipulated evidence. Under Pakistan's Diyat law, which allows family members to forgive murderers, he managed to get Zara's older brother, through substantial payment, to forgive the crime, thus guaranteeing his legal freedom. The psychological manipulation that Omar had exercised over Zara had been so complete that even her death was seen by the family as a consequence of her own disobedience. This capacity for manipulation and extreme violence was not an aberration, but a carefully developed pattern of behavior. Omar identified vulnerable young women in traditionalist families, offered them exactly what they most desired, freedom and love, and then destroyed them when they no longer served his purposes. Amira was merely the second victim of a predator who had perfected his techniques through previous murder. When Amira discovered her pregnancy in January 2014, her first reaction was absolute panic. An unmarried pregnant young woman in a conservative society faced not only social ostracism, but real risk of death. Omar, realizing the situation was escaping his control and that pregnancy would force a quick resolution, immediately pressed for a secret marriage, claiming it was the only way to protect both her and the baby. In a civil ceremony held discreetly on the outskirts of Karachi, away from the eyes of the community that knew them, Amira and Omar became husband and wife under Pakistani law. The ceremony was witnessed only by 2 of Omar's friends, men he knew would maintain absolute silence about the event. For Amira, it should have been the happiest moment of her life, finally free to live her love openly. But for Omar, it was just another step in a deadly game he had already played before. The marriage secret lasted only 3 weeks. In a society where everyone knows each other and rumors travel faster than official news, it was impossible to hide for long that Amira had disappeared from home and was living as Omar's wife. The discovery came through a neighbor who saw them together in a Karachi market, behaving as husband and wife. When the news reached Hassan Hussein's ears, the reaction was apocalyptic fury that echoed throughout the village. His youngest daughter had not only disobeyed family arrangements, not only gotten involved with a man 15 years older, but had secretly married, bringing irreparable dishonor to the entire family. The pregnancy, which should have been cause for celebration, became physical evidence of betrayal that demanded exemplary punishment. But the issue that terrified Hassan and his sons was not just Amira's disobedience. It was the precedent this would establish for other women in the family and community. If one young woman could defy matrimonial arrangements with impunity, marry for love, and live happily, how many others would follow the same path? The only way to prevent total collapse of the patriarchal system was to demonstrate publicly that such rebellion would result in fatal consequences. Hassan's immediate response was to resort to the Pakistani judicial system, which frequently collaborated with traditional families in maintaining control over rebellious women. He filed a formal kidnapping complaint against Omar at the local police station, alleging that his daughter had been abducted against her will and forced into illegal marriage through coercion and threats. The kidnapping accusation was a common and effective legal strategy to invalidate marriages not authorized by families. By alleging that Amira was being held against her will, Hassan could use state power to recover his daughter and annul the marriage. Pakistani law, although theoretically protecting women's right to choose their husbands, in practice frequently favored versions presented by fathers. For the following 6 weeks, Amira and Omar lived under constant police persecution. Officers appeared at their house at any hour of day or night, conducting searches and interrogations that were more intended to intimidate than investigate. The psychological pressure was intense. They knew Hassan had enough influence to guarantee the persecution would continue indefinitely. The situation became so dangerous that Amira was forced to seek temporary shelter in a protection house for threatened women located in downtown Karachi. For 3 weeks, she lived in a small room with other women who had fled arranged marriages, domestic violence, or death threats. The institution's counselors warned her about the risks of returning to Omar, explaining that men like him frequently used pregnancy to maintain total control over their victims. But love, or what Amira believed was love, was stronger than prudence. Against all advice received, she left the protection house and returned to Omar, thus sealing her own fate. What she didn't know was that her decision to return would be interpreted by the family as final confirmation that she had chosen dishonor over redemption, making inevitable the violent response being planned. Threats against the couple quickly escalated from whispered words to concrete violent actions that made it clear the Hussein family's patience had completely run out. The house where Amira and Omar lived was attacked 3 times by groups of hooded men who arrived in the middle of the night, throwing stones at windows, painting death threats on walls, and shouting insults that woke the entire neighborhood. Death messages arrived daily through different channels, notes left at the door, messages transmitted by acquaintances, and even threats shouted in the street when the couple ventured out of the house. The content was always the same. Amira had one last chance to abandon Omar and return home, or she would face fatal consequences of her disobedience. What Amira didn't know was that her family had already made an irreversible decision about her fate. In a secret meeting held at Hassan's house, more than 20 men from the extended family had unanimously voted for Amira's death. It was no longer about trying to bring her back or negotiate a solution. It was about permanently eliminating the source of family dishonor. The decision was made based on honor codes that considered some offenses unforgivable. Amira had committed not just one, but several fatal transgressions. She had disobeyed her parents, broken an arranged engagement, married without permission, gotten pregnant outside marriage approved by the family, and worst of all, had refused to redeem herself when she had the opportunity. Each of these actions individually could justify violence. Together, they signed her death sentence. The plan that began to take shape was simple in its brutality. Wait for a public opportunity to execute Amira, so the entire community could witness the fate reserved for women who defied family authority. The public execution would serve not only to eliminate the source of dishonor, but also to send a clear message to other young women who might be considering following Amira's example. The morning of May 15, 2014, began with renewed hope for Amira and Omar. They woke early in their small house on the outskirts of Karachi, preparing for what they believed would be the final court hearing that would put an end, once and for all, to the kidnapping charges. Their lawyer, Mustafa Qureshi, had assured them that with Amira's testimony, confirming she had married voluntarily, the case would be dismissed and they could finally live in peace. During breakfast, Amira spoke animatedly about plans for the baby, who would be born in a few months. She had begun to show visible signs of pregnancy, and this filled her with hope. Certainly no one would be cruel enough to attack a pregnant woman, she thought naively. Omar, who knew better the nature of the men he was dealing with, tried to demonstrate optimism, but a dark concern persisted in his eyes. At 7:30 a.m., the couple left home and took a crowded bus toward downtown Karachi. During the hour-long journey, they talked about the new life that would begin after legal resolution. Amira dreamed of being able to visit family again, perhaps even reconcile with her parents when they saw she was happy. She didn't know that more than 20 of her relatives were already strategically positioned around the Superior Court, awaiting their arrival with improvised weapons and thirst for revenge. Hassan Hussein had spent the previous night coordinating final details of the ambush. Each relative received a specific function. Some would block escape routes, others would handle restraining Omar, and the closest ones, himself, his 2 sons, and cousin Malik, would directly execute the sentence against Amira. The chosen weapons were deliberately primitive, stones, sticks, and ropes, so death would be slow and public, maximizing both suffering and psychological impact on witnesses. When Amira and Omar got off the bus 2 blocks from the courthouse at 8:15 a.m., they still hadn't realized they were being watched. Disguised relatives posing as street vendors, beggars, and ordinary pedestrians accompanied every step of the couple, communicating through discreet signals and cell phones. The circle was closing, but the victims remained unconscious of the mortal danger awaiting them just meters away. The attack began at 8:22 a.m. on a busy Tuesday morning in front of the Karachi Superior Court, while hundreds of people passed through the city's main street. Hassan Hussein was the first to approach Amira, shouting insults that echoed throughout the area. "Dishonored daughter, you destroyed our family." Immediately, other relatives emerged from the crowd, surrounding the couple in a deadly circle that offered no escape route. When Amira tried to run toward the court entrance, where she hoped to find security protection. Her own brothers intercepted her brutally. Ahmed, the oldest, pushed her violently against a concrete wall, while Rashid began kicking her in the abdomen, deliberately targeting the baby she was carrying. Amira's desperate screams, "Please, think of the baby, don't do this," only intensified the attacker's fury. Omar desperately tried to protect his wife, but was quickly overpowered by 8 men, who immobilized him and forced him to watch what was happening. They wanted him to witness every second of the torture, to understand the price of stealing a daughter from a traditional family. "Now you'll see what happens to men who destroy honorable families," shouted Malik, Amira's former fiancé, while holding Omar by the hair. The first stone hit Amira's head at 8:24 a.m., thrown by her own father with enough force to open a deep cut that began bleeding abundantly. The impact made her stagger, but she remained standing, pleading, "Father, please, I am your daughter." The response came in the form of more stones, now thrown by her brothers, cousins, and uncles, each competing to demonstrate their loyalty to family honor codes. For 7 eternal minutes, Amira was systematically beaten with stones, sticks, and fists, while a crowd of at least 100 people watched in absolute silence. Later witnesses would report that the most shocking thing was not just the brutality of the attack, but the complete passivity of the observers, including 2 police officers who remained motionless during the entire murder, treating the situation as a family matter that didn't require official intervention. When Amira finally fell to the ground, still conscious but seriously injured, Hassan ordered them to bring a rope. "If she wants to live like a disobedient animal, she will die like an animal," he declared, while adjusting the rope around his daughter's neck. The final strangulation lasted almost 2 minutes, with Amira frantically fighting for life until her movements completely ceased at 8:31 a.m. The murderers didn't flee immediately. Hassan remained beside his daughter's body for 5 more minutes, declaring for all who could hear, "This is the punishment for daughters who dishonor their families. Let it serve as an example for all others." Only when ambulance sirens approached did the relatives disperse calmly, as if they had just completed necessary work. The trial of Amira's murderers, which began 6 months later, revealed not only profound failures of a judicial system that allowed such atrocities, but also disturbing connections with a network of similar crimes that had been systematically covered up for decades. Hassan Hussein was sentenced to death but never executed due to legal moratoriums. His sons received life sentences, but were released after 3 years when the victim's family, ironically themselves, forgave the crimes under Diyat law. Omar al-Rashid survived the attack, but would carry forever the physical and psychological scars of having witnessed the murder of his pregnant wife. Later investigations would finally reveal the truth about his first wife's death, leading to his own arrest for homicide. Ironically, the man who had manipulated Amira had also become a victim of the same system of violence she had faced. Amira's death generated international protests and diplomatic pressure on Pakistan to reform its laws on honor crimes. But while politicians made speeches and activists organized demonstrations, in a village just 50 kilometers from where Amira was murdered, another 19-year-old Muslim woman was beginning to secretly question the marriage arranged by her family. Her name was Zara, and she had just met a man who promised to free her from the chains of tradition, who spoke about true love and a different life. She didn't know that her steps were being watched by eyes that would not tolerate another act of disobedience, nor that history was about to repeat itself with terrifyingly similar details.